They say time heals everything, but some memories don't fade. They just settle in the quiet corners of the soul. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, my grandson looked up from his toys and said, "Grandma, when Dad's away, a man comes to visit Mom." His voice was soft, like it wasn't meant to cause harm, but it struck me like thunder. I felt that same chill I hadn't felt in decades, not because of what he said, but because of the way he said it, confused, uncertain, carrying a weight too heavy for such a young heart. My name is Nora Elaine Monroe. I'm 74 years old, and I live in a small town in North Carolina. I sell homemade pies at the Sunday Farmers Market and help care for my grandkids when their parents are working late. My hands have raised children, comforted neighbors, and wiped more tears than I can count. People know me for my apple crumble and my warm smile, but there's a part of my story no one knows, a chapter I've kept buried for more than 60 years. Today I'm finally opening that chapter, not for me, but for my grandson, because of one sentence, one crack in the silence. This isn't about revenge or attention. It's about truth, a truth I locked away when I was just a girl, hoping the lock would hold forever. But some locks rust. And when a child speaks of something odd, something off, that's not imagination. That's a warning. I learned that too late in my own life, and I refuse to ignore it now. There's something sacred about telling the truth when your voice has been silent for so long. It feels like learning how to breathe again. For years, I thought silence kept my family safe, that if I carried the burden alone, no one else would get hurt. But the truth is, silence can become its own kind of harm. I thought the worst was behind me, but that moment in the kitchen showed me the past still had a pulse, and that it could still reach the next generation. For so long, I convinced myself that what happened to me didn't matter anymore, that I was fine, that I had survived. But surviving isn't the same as healing. And healing, I'm learning now, begins with speaking. So here I am, finally using my voice. This is the story of a girl who carried a secret too big for her little hands, and of the woman she became. Strong, yes, but tired of hiding. There's a kind of strength in vulnerability, in saying, "This happened, it hurt me, but it didn't destroy me." I tell this story because I see the patterns repeating, the danger disguised as normal, the predators hiding behind charm. And if I can help even one person listen differently, look closer, speak up sooner, then maybe my pain won't have been for nothing. Sometimes people see me as just a sweet old woman with gray hair tied back in a bun, humming old tunes while baking. They have no idea of the nights I couldn't sleep, the years I spent pretending everything was fine. But now, I'm done pretending. My grandson gave me the push I didn't know I needed. That little boy reminded me of a little girl I once was, and I can't ignore her any longer. If you're hearing this, I ask you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps me continue sharing stories like this one. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? Your presence means more than you know. I was born in a small rural town in North Carolina, surrounded by tobacco fields and pine trees that swayed like they were whispering secrets. Our house was modest. One story, white painted wood with creaky porch steps, and a screen door that always slammed too loudly. My mama kept the place spotless, even though she worked long hours sewing for the ladies in town. Daddy was up before the sun every morning, tending to a patch of land that barely fed us. But there was laughter in our kitchen, hymns in the air, and warmth in the worn quilt that covered us all on cold nights. Life wasn't easy, but it was whole. I was the oldest of three. Me, then my brother, Matthew, and little Jenny. Being the oldest meant waking up first, helping Mama knead biscuit dough, brushing Jenny's hair, and making sure Matthew didn't forget his lunch. I didn't mind. Taking care of them felt like the most natural thing in the world. I wore hand-me-downs and patched socks, but I carried a pride in my chest that no one could take from me. Pride in my family, in my mama's humming voice, in the way my daddy smiled with tired eyes when he walked through that door each evening. Our days followed a rhythm that felt eternal. Breakfast by 6, school by 7, chores by 4, supper by 6:30, prayers by 8. In the afternoons, we'd play barefoot in the grass behind the house, catching lightning bugs in jars or laying on the ground, watching the clouds drift. Matthew loved to pretend he was a cowboy, galloping across the yard with a stick for a horse. Jenny would make up songs and twirl until she got dizzy. I'd sit on the porch steps with a book, the kind Miss Clara from the library let me borrow, even though we never paid the late fees. Sundays were sacred. We dressed in our best, even if best meant shoes with scuffed toes and dresses patched at the seams. Church was the heart of our week. The choir sang with voices that could break you open and mend you all at once. Afterward, Mama would make fried chicken and sweet tea, and we'd sit around the table with uncles, cousins, and neighbors, laughing so loud the cicadas quieted to listen. Those moments felt like forever. Our house always smelled of something: cornbread in the oven, pine cleaner on the floors, baby powder on Jenny's skin. Mama's hands moved constantly, folding laundry, stirring pots, fixing hems. She didn't speak much, but you could hear her love in the way she tucked us in at night, kissed our foreheads, and whispered, "God's watching over you." I believed her. I believed nothing could ever touch us, not with Mama standing guard. Daddy didn't talk much either, but when he did, his words were steady and true. He taught me how to snap green beans, how to mend a fence, how to tell if a storm was coming by the smell in the air. "Be strong, Nora," he'd say, "but don't lose your softness." I didn't understand it then. I do now. There's power in tenderness. It's what got me through later. The kitchen was the soul of our home. It's where we sang together, fought, made up, and made do. Mama had an old radio she kept near the stove. It crackled out gospel songs and news stories, and in between those sounds, life happened. That little kitchen witnessed the best of us. If I close my eyes, I can still see Mama rolling dough while humming, Jenny twirling with a wooden spoon, and Matthew trying to sneak a biscuit before supper. Our school was small, just one long hallway and 4 classrooms. Miss Thompson, my 5th grade teacher, wore thick glasses and smelled like lavender. She made us memorize poems and spell out words none of us would use for years, but I loved it. Loved the order, the quiet promise that learning might lead us somewhere better. I dreamed of becoming a teacher myself one day, standing at the chalkboard, guiding other little girls like me to something more. The neighborhood kids would meet after school under the old oak tree by Miller's Pond. We skipped rocks, played tag, whispered secrets we thought were big. No one had phones, no one had money, but we had each other. We had our own little world, untouched by the worries of grown-ups. And I felt safe. As long as I could run fast, climb high, and make my siblings laugh, the world couldn't touch us. In the summers, the days stretched long. We'd wake up with the sun and fall asleep under a sky full of stars. Daddy built us a swing from an old tire, and we'd take turns flying toward the clouds. Sometimes Mama would pack us a small picnic, a jar of pickles, some cornbread, a piece of cold fried chicken, and we'd sit near the creek, dipping our toes in the water, pretending we were somewhere far away. Christmas was simple but full of magic. We didn't have much. One small gift each, maybe a peppermint stick or a new pair of socks. But Mama made cinnamon rolls from scratch, and Daddy chopped down a pine tree that filled the house with its scent. We strung popcorn garlands, sang carols by candlelight, and prayed hard for the new year. I believed in miracles. I truly did. The night times were quiet. We shared a room, all 3 of us, snuggled under one quilt, listening to the wind outside and the creaks of the old house settling. I used to whisper stories to Jenny and Matthew, made up tales about brave girls and magical woods. They believed every word. So did I. In those moments, we were invincible. Just 3 kids wrapped in dreams. Mama used to say, "What you give to the world will find its way back to you." I didn't know then how much I'd give, how much the world would take before it returned anything. But in those early years, I believed her. I believed. Goodness was enough. Even the hard days didn't break us. When the crops failed or Daddy got sick or the bills piled up, we stayed together. We sang, we prayed, we pulled closer. Our strength wasn't loud, but it was real. It was in Mama's steady hands, in Daddy's silent loyalty, in the way Jenny reached for me in her sleep. There was one tree in the yard, a tall magnolia with thick branches and wide leaves. I'd climb it often, book in hand, and sit there for hours. It was my throne, my secret, my escape. I felt like I could see the whole world from up there, and for a while, it was a world worth looking at, a world that didn't yet know what was coming. I kept a small box under my bed, a few marbles, a pressed flower, a picture of Mama holding me as a baby. That box was my treasure, my proof that happiness once lived in our home. I didn't know then how much I'd need that proof in the years to come, because in our little corner of the world I thought we were safe. I thought love was enough. I thought monsters only lived in stories, and I thought silence was just another kind of peace. But I was wrong. The winter I turned 12 came early that year. Frost coated the windows by mid-November, and Mama's cough started not long after. At first she brushed it off, said it was just a chill, nothing a little honey and lemon couldn't fix. But the cough grew deeper, harsher. She moved slower around the house, and her voice, once steady, became hoarse and strained. Still, she insisted on cooking, sewing, keeping everything running like always. I remember watching her stir the grits one morning with trembling hands. I wanted to tell her to rest, to stop, but I didn't. I didn't know how to ask my Mama to stop being the heart of our home. One morning, she didn't get out of bed. I knew something was wrong the second I stepped into her room. The air felt heavier, stiller. She was burning with fever, her breath shallow and raspy. Daddy ran to fetch the town doctor, who came hours later with a stethoscope and a tired face. "Pneumonia," he said. "It's serious." He gave us some medicine, told us to keep her warm, pray, and hope for the best. We did. We prayed around the clock. Jenny cried in my lap. Matthew stopped talking altogether. Daddy barely left her side. But hope isn't always enough. She died 4 days later, in the middle of the night. I was holding her hand when it happened. One moment she was breathing, weak and slow. The next, she wasn't. Her hand went cold so fast it didn't feel real. I remember staring at her face, waiting for her to open her eyes to scold me for being up so late. But she didn't. And something inside me broke that night, something that's never fully healed. We buried her on a hill overlooking the creek she loved. The whole town came, neighbors, church ladies, even kids from school. But nothing felt real. I stood by the grave in my best dress, my shoes too tight, holding Jenny's hand while Daddy stared blankly ahead. I didn't cry. Not then. I couldn't. It was like I had turned to stone. Later I cried alone in the barn, muffling my sobs into a pile of hay, hoping no one would hear. The house changed immediately after Mama died. It was colder, quieter, like all the warmth had been buried with her. Daddy stopped going to the fields. He spent most of his time on the porch, rocking in silence, staring into nothing. I tried to fill her shoes, waking up early, cooking meals, making sure. Jenny and Matthew got to school, but I was 12. I didn't know how to be a mother. I only knew how to survive. It wasn't long before Uncle Ray started showing up. He was Daddy's younger brother, the fun one, folks used to say. Lived a few counties over and sold insurance. He came with bags of groceries, smiles, and stories. Said he was just checking in, helping out. Daddy welcomed him with open arms. "We're grateful," he said. "I don't know what I'd do without you." And just like that, Uncle Ray became a part of our daily life. At first it was nice having him around. He fixed the leaky faucet, mowed the lawn, brought home cooked meals from his lady friend. But then he started staying later, sleeping on the couch, then in the guest room, then eventually it was just understood. Uncle Ray lived with us now. Daddy seemed relieved. Said it was good for the kids, good for the house, but I felt it in my bones. Something wasn't right. I didn't have the words yet, but I knew. He knew. Uncle Ray had a way of watching me that made my skin crawl. Not at first. He was subtle. A comment about how grown up I was getting. A too long pat on the back. A smile that didn't reach his eyes. He'd offer to help me with my chores, stand too close in the kitchen. I started staying out longer after school, walking extra blocks just to delay coming home. But I never said anything, because Daddy needed him, because we needed help, because I didn't want to make trouble. Mama's chair, the living room stayed empty. Her perfume faded from the bedroom. Her voice, once so constant, now only lived in my memory. And in that silence, Uncle Ray's presence grew louder, stronger, like a shadow creeping into every corner of the house. Uncle Ray took over our lives like a slow-moving storm, not loud or violent, just steady, creeping, inevitable. He started by taking charge of dinner, said Daddy needed rest, that I was too young to be running a kitchen. At first I was relieved, but then he'd criticize how I folded the towels, how I swept the porch, how I dressed. "You're a young lady now," he'd say. "Gotta start acting like one." His tone was calm, even sweet, but there was always something behind it, something I couldn't name, but I felt it in my gut. The first time he came into my room at night, he didn't say a word. I was already in bed, pretending to be asleep. I heard the creak of the door, the soft shuffle of his feet on the wooden floor. He stood there for a while, just watching. I kept my breath slow and steady, like Mama used to when she rocked Jenny to sleep. He eventually left, but I didn't sleep at all that night. I laid there frozen, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. The next morning, he smiled at me over breakfast, like nothing happened, like it had all been a dream. It became a pattern. Some nights, nothing. Other nights, the door creaked open again. Sometimes he'd whisper things, compliments that didn't feel like compliments. "You're the woman of the house now. So pretty, just like your mama." I didn't respond. I just stayed still, pretending, hoping that if I didn't react, he'd go away. But he never really went away. He found new ways to stay close. A hand on my shoulder that lingered too long. A brush against my back as I passed. A stare that made my skin feel like it didn't belong to me. I started wearing baggy clothes, pulling my hair back, avoiding mirrors. I made myself smaller, quieter. I tried to disappear. Inside the house I once called home. But Uncle Ray noticed. "Why are you dressing like a boy?" he'd tease. "Hiding from somebody?" He'd laugh, but I didn't. I didn't say anything, because I knew he wanted a reaction, and I wouldn't give him that. I couldn't. Daddy didn't notice, or maybe he did, and didn't want to see. He was still grieving, still drifting like a man lost at sea. Uncle Ray did the talking for him, paid the bills, made the decisions. "She's going through a phase," he'd tell. Daddy, when I got quiet. "Teenage girls, you know." Daddy nodded, always nodded. I hated him for that, for leaving me alone when I needed him most. Jenny was too young to understand, but even she started clinging to me more. One night I heard her crying from her room. I rushed in, and she told me she had a bad dream about a man with no face standing in the doorway. I held her all night, afraid that maybe it wasn't just a dream, that maybe her soul was already sensing what her mind couldn't yet explain. After that, I slept with her as often as I could. I became her protector, her shield. Uncle Ray grew bolder. He'd find reasons to be alone with me, sent Matthew to the store, asked Daddy to go lie down. Then it'd just be me and him in the kitchen or the living room or the hallway, always too close. "You're lucky to have a man around," he said once. "Girls without guidance, they get lost." His words were poison wrapped in honey. I started shaking whenever I heard his boots on the porch. One afternoon, he asked me to help him clean out the shed. I said no. It was the first time I defied him openly. His smile dropped, and for a moment I saw the mask slip. His eyes turned cold, and he stepped close enough for me to smell the mint gum he always chewed. "You think you're grown," he whispered. "You don't know what grown means." But he didn't push it. He just walked away. Still, I knew it was only a matter of time. I tried to tell someone. Once, Miss Thompson, my teacher, asked why I was so tired all the time. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Instead, I smiled and said I had trouble sleeping since Mama died. She nodded, patted my hand, and sent me on my way. I wanted to scream, to beg her to ask again, to look deeper. But I didn't, because if I said it out loud, it would be real, and I wasn't ready for that. Matthew watched me more closely after that. He didn't say much, but his eyes stayed on me. I think he knew something wasn't right. He'd sit near me when Uncle Ray was around, linger longer in rooms he used to breeze through. We didn't talk about it, but he was watching, just like me. Uncle Ray was careful. In public, he was all charm, helped the neighbors, brought casseroles to church gatherings, offered rides to anyone who needed one. Folks loved him. Your family's lucky, they'd say. Men like that don't come around often. I wanted to shout at them, to tell them what he really was. But I smiled instead, just like I always did. Night, I stopped sleeping. I'd stay awake until I heard his footsteps fade down the hallway. Then I'd curl up on the floor beside Jenny's bed and rest my head on my arms. I kept a small knife under the mattress, one of Mama's old paring knives. I didn't know if I could use it, but holding it made me feel a little less powerless. I became obsessed with staying clean. I scrubbed the kitchen until my hands were raw. I brushed my teeth until my gums bled. I washed my body so often that my skin cracked. I think I was trying to scrub him off, to erase every trace, but it didn't work. No matter how much I scrubbed, I still felt dirty. I stopped talking, not just to him, but to everyone. I answered questions with nods, shrugged when people spoke to me. It was easier that way. Easier to pretend nothing was wrong. Easier to keep the rage and fear bottled up where it couldn't hurt anyone else. Silence became my shield. He never hit me, not with fists. His violence was quieter, more insidious. The way he claimed my space, my body, my voice. The way he twisted things to make me doubt myself. You wanted this, he'd whisper. You liked the attention. I was 12. I didn't even understand what that meant. But I knew it was wrong. I knew it was evil. Sometimes I imagined what Mama would do if she was still alive. Would she have seen it? Would she have stopped it? I liked to think she would have protected me. But a darker part of me wondered if she would have been too afraid, too conditioned to keep quiet like the rest of us. I hated myself for thinking that. But it's the truth. Eventually, I stopped hoping someone would save me. I realized I had to be the one to save myself. So I started paying attention to his habits, to his moods, to the times he left the house and when he came back. I became a student of his behavior, not because I cared, but because I needed to know when I'd finally be safe, or when I'd need to run. And I knew, deep down, that the time for running was coming soon. Mornings became mechanical. I woke up before everyone else, made breakfast, packed lunches, and checked Jenny's homework, all while carrying a secret too heavy for my 12-year-old frame. I moved like a ghost through our home, quiet and efficient. Every task was a distraction. Scrubbing dishes until my knuckles bled was easier than thinking. Folding laundry gave me control over at least something. Uncle Ray still watched me, still whispered, still hovered, but I'd learned how to shrink, how to make myself invisible. I started wearing Matthew's old clothes, oversized jeans, thick flannel shirts, anything to hide my body. I stopped brushing my hair, stopped looking in mirrors. When people asked if I was okay, I smiled and said I was just missing Mama. It was half true. I missed her more than anything. But it was the other half, the part I couldn't say, that festered inside me, the part that made my stomach churn and my hands shake. Jenny started drawing. Strange pictures, dark houses, sad faces, eyes without pupils. Her teacher sent a note home, saying she seemed withdrawn. I wanted to scream that it wasn't her, that it was the air we breathed, the presence we lived under. But I folded the note and tucked it into my drawer. Like everything else, it became another thing I couldn't explain. My body betrayed me. I started getting sick. Headaches, stomach aches, dizzy spells. Sometimes I'd lie awake for hours, flinching at every creak of the floorboards. Other nights, I'd sleep so deeply I woke up disoriented, unsure if I was still in danger. My appetite vanished. My skin lost its color. I looked like a ghost of the girl I used to be. No one said anything. No one asked. Uncle Ray blamed it on growing pains. Daddy nodded like always. There were marks, small bruises in places no one could see, soreness I couldn't explain. I learned how to hide it, how to move slowly, how to breathe through the pain. Every day felt like walking a tightrope. One wrong step, and everything would come crashing down. I couldn't afford to fall. Not with Jenny watching me. Not with Matthew growing more suspicious by the day. I stopped going to church, said I wasn't feeling well. Uncle Ray didn't protest. He liked having me alone. I knew that. So I avoided being alone with him as much as I could. But in that house, there was no real escape. He was always there, in the hallways, at the dinner table, leaning against the doorframe of whatever room I happened to be in, always smiling, always watching. Miss Thompson, my teacher, kept trying to reach me. She'd ask if I was okay, if I wanted to stay after class and talk. I always said no. I couldn't risk it. What if she told someone? What if they didn't believe me? What if things got worse? The silence that had once been forced on me had now become my own choice, a prison I built to protect myself. Matthew changed. He wasn't as carefree anymore. He watched me closely, followed me around. One day, he asked if Uncle Ray ever made me uncomfortable. I looked him straight in the eyes and said no. Then I turned away before he could see me cry. I wanted to protect him, too. He was just a kid. He didn't deserve this. None of us did. Daddy was a shell. He worked odd jobs during the day, came home and sat on the porch in silence. Sometimes he'd drink, sometimes he'd cry, but he never asked about us, never looked too closely. I think he knew something was wrong. I think that's why he didn't ask, because he was afraid of what he'd hear. And I hated him for that. The house became a place of shadows. The rooms felt smaller. The air felt thicker. I kept the lights on at night, even though it made Uncle Ray angry. Waste of electricity, he'd growl. But I didn't care. I needed the light. I needed something to keep the darkness from swallowing me whole. I found a hiding spot in the attic, a little corner behind some old boxes. I kept a notebook there, and I wrote everything. Every word he said, every time he came too close, every bruise, every nightmare. Writing it down made it real, made me feel less crazy. I kept the notebook wrapped in a towel, hidden under a loose floorboard. My tiny act of rebellion. I became hyper-aware. I could tell where Uncle Ray was in the house just by the sound of his footsteps. I memorized the creak in the third stair, the way the front door clicked when it closed. I knew his schedule, when he left, when he returned, how long he took at the store. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was preparing. I stopped praying. Church had always been a comfort, a ritual. But now, the idea of a God who watched and did nothing made me feel sick. I couldn't understand how something so evil could live in our house while heaven stayed silent. Mama used to say God protected the innocent, but I didn't feel protected. I felt abandoned. Every so often I'd hear laughter from the neighbors, kids playing outside, dogs barking, music on the radio. The world kept moving like nothing had happened, and that made it worse. Because inside our house, time had stopped. Joy had vanished, and no one knew. Or maybe they didn't want to know. Uncle Ray started talking about moving. Said we could have a fresh start somewhere new, maybe out west. Said Daddy needed a change. But I knew the truth. He wanted to take us away. Farther from school, from Miss Thompson, from anyone who might notice. That night I cried harder than I ever had, because I knew if we left, we'd never come back. I started hiding small things. A pocket knife, a flashlight, a few dollars I found under Daddy's mattress. I didn't know what I'd do with them. I just knew I needed to be ready. I wasn't sure what I was preparing for. Running, fighting, surviving. But I was preparing, because deep down, I knew something had to give. Jenny's drawings got darker. One showed a girl in a locked room with a shadow outside the door. When I asked her about it, she just shrugged. "It's a dream I had," she said. I didn't press. But that night, I slept with her tucked under my arm, my hand gripping the pocket knife like a lifeline. Miss Thompson sent a letter home. Said I was failing math and falling behind in reading. Uncle Ray read it, laughed, and said girls didn't need to be smart, just pretty and polite. I clenched my fists so hard my nails cut into my palms. But I said nothing, because he still had the power, and I still didn't have a plan. But the silence, once comforting, had started to suffocate me. I needed air. I needed out. I didn't know when or how, but I knew this story, my story, couldn't end with me trapped in that house. I started dreaming again, not of fairy tales, but of escape, of freedom, of a life where I wasn't afraid. And with each passing day, that dream became less of a wish and more of a vow. I would get us out. I would survive this, and one day I'd speak the truth, even if no one was ready to hear it. The shift began with a single word, no. It came out of my mouth one evening when Uncle Ray told me to clean the kitchen after supper. I was tired, my hands aching from scrubbing, my spirit frayed. I looked him in the eye and said, "No, not tonight." He stared at me for a moment, shocked, maybe amused, then turned and walked away. Nothing happened. No punishment, no yelling, just silence. And in that silence, I felt something crack open, a small glowing ember inside me that I thought had died. After that, I started saying no more often, not always out loud, sometimes in how I stood, how I moved, how I looked away when he tried to hold my gaze. I was reclaiming small pieces of myself. I didn't feel strong, not yet, but I felt aware. I started noticing the way he flinched when I didn't obey, the slight panic behind his eyes when I stood taller. It wasn't much, but it was something. I returned to school with a purpose. Miss Thompson welcomed me with a long look, not one of judgment, but concern. I didn't speak much, but I lingered after class. She never pushed, just gave me space. One day she handed me a granola bar and said, "You're not invisible, Nora. I see you." It was all I needed to hear. I didn't cry in front of her, but I held on to those words like armor. Matthew became my quiet protector. He didn't ask questions, but he started shadowing me, keeping Jenny close, stepping in between me and Uncle Ray during chores. He'd sit next to me on the porch at night without speaking, just being there. I think he knew. I think he'd always known. And I think, in his own way, he was waiting for me to be ready. I began to study Uncle Ray, not like a scared child, but like a detective. I learned his habits, when he was distracted, when he drank too much, when he left the house. I tracked the times he locked the back door, when he searched my room, when he whispered things under his breath. Every piece of information became a weapon I stored away. I started writing again. In the attic, in my notebook, I wrote not just what happened, but who I was, who I wanted to be. I created a version of myself that was brave, clever, unstoppable. She looked like me, but she didn't flinch. She didn't tremble. She spoke her truth loudly. I wasn't her yet, but I was getting closer. At school, I stopped hiding. I raised my hand in class, answered questions. I made eye contact. I knew Uncle Ray would hear about it, and that was the point. I wanted him to know I wasn't his anymore, that he didn't own my silence, that he was losing control. The power he held depended on me being small, and I wasn't small anymore. Jenny drew a picture of our family, just me, her, and Matthew, sitting under the magnolia tree. No Uncle Ray, no Daddy, just us. I asked her why. She shrugged and said, "That's how I want it to be." I didn't cry, but I hugged her so tightly she giggled. That picture went straight into my notebook, proof that we all wanted something better. One afternoon, I followed Matthew to the old barn behind the house. He was piling stones in a corner, building something. I asked what it was. "A place to hide," he said, "in case we need it." We didn't say anything else, but from then on we called it the spot, our secret place, our backup plan. Miss Thompson gave me a journal, said it was just for me, no assignments, no grades. "Write whatever you need," she told me. I didn't ask how she knew I needed it, but I wrote in it every night. And one night, I wrote something I hadn't dared say before. I'm going to tell. It scared me, but it also freed me. I started stashing food, granola bars, apples, water bottles, under the floorboard in the attic. I knew we couldn't run yet, but I wanted to be ready. I didn't know how far we'd get or who would help us, but I knew I couldn't let this keep happening. Not to Jenny, not to Matthew, not to me. Uncle Ray began to sense the change. He started acting nicer, more careful, offered me gifts, a new hairbrush, a book. I refused them all. He smiled too much, watched me more closely, but I could see the cracks. He was scared, and that gave me power, because fear meant he knew I was capable of something he hadn't expected. Every night I laid awake, going over scenarios in my head, who I could tell, what I could say, how I could prove it. I even rehearsed it in front of the mirror once, just to hear the words. "He's hurting me. He's dangerous. Please help." It was shaky, but it was real, and it was mine, my truth. I wasn't free yet, but I wasn't powerless either. The silence had cracks now. Light was slipping in, and I was ready to break it wide open. The night everything changed started like any other. Uncle Ray came home late, his boots heavy on the porch, the scent of whiskey trailing behind him. I was in the kitchen finishing the dishes, heart thudding like a second heartbeat. Jenny was already asleep, curled up in my bed, her thumb tucked under her chin. Matthew was in the living room, pretending to read, but really just watching the hallway. We'd gotten good at silent communication. One look, one nod, and we all knew what was coming. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Need to talk to you, Nora, out back." My stomach dropped. He never asked before. That's how I knew. This wasn't just another night. This was something else. Something worse. I wiped my hands on my apron and looked at Matthew. He didn't move, but his eyes locked with mine. I nodded once. That was all he needed. I followed Uncle Ray outside to the shed. The air was thick with humidity and dread. The light from the porch barely reached us. "You think you're grown," he said, "walking around like you're better than me now." I didn't answer. My hands were in my pockets, clutching the folded piece of paper I had written weeks ago. My confession, my plea. I'd rewritten it 10 times. Now it was time to use it. He stepped closer. I could smell the alcohol on his breath. "You ain't going." "Nowhere," he muttered. "You belong here. You owe me." That's when the door to the house slammed open. Matthew came running out, holding a flashlight and yelling, "Get away from her!" Uncle Ray turned, startled, and that was all I needed. I bolted, ran straight past him, into the night, through the front yard and down the road, barefoot, heart pounding, lungs burning. I didn't stop until I reached Miss Thompson's house. I'd memorized the way. I'd rehearsed what I'd say. But when she opened the door, I couldn't speak. I just handed her the letter, collapsed into her arms and cried. She didn't ask questions. She didn't doubt me. She called the sheriff and wrapped me in a blanket. And for the first time in years, I felt safe. The police came that same night, took him away in handcuffs, shirt untucked, cursing under his breath. The neighbors watched from their porches, mouths open, unsure what to believe. Daddy just sat on the steps, head in his hands. He didn't say a word, and maybe that silence was its own kind of answer. Jenny and Matthew were placed with me in emergency foster care. Miss Thompson stayed close, guiding us through every step, court dates, interviews, therapy. I told my story over and over. It hurt every time, but it also helped. Each time I said it out loud, it lost some of its power over me. The morning after he was arrested, I woke up to sunlight streaming through a clean window, the smell of pancakes and the sound of Jenny giggling. Matthew handed me a drawing. It was us, standing in a field. No shadows, no fences, just sky. I hung it on the wall. If this part touched you, please like the video so more people can find courage through this story. We never went back to that house. We didn't need to. The home we built afterward was quieter, smaller, but it was safe. Jenny grew up with laughter in her voice again, and Matthew started smiling like a real boy, not like someone pretending to be okay. We stayed with Miss Thompson for a while until the state placed us with a family who truly cared. They didn't try to erase our past. They let us carry it, hold it, and learn to breathe beside it. Uncle Ray went to prison. I testified. I sat there in a cold courtroom, hands shaking, voice steady, and told the truth. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I did it. For Jenny, for Matthew, for the girl I once was, the one who thought no one would ever listen. People believed me, and something about being believed healed a part of me I didn't even know was broken. Daddy faded from our lives. He sent a letter once, years later. I never opened it. I didn't need to. His silence had already said everything. I stopped being angry eventually, not because I forgave him, but because I chose not to carry him with me anymore. Some weights you simply lay down, and that too is a kind of peace. Now I'm 74. I sell pies at the farmer's market. I have 3 grandkids who think the world rises and sets in my kitchen. People see a sweet, smiling old lady with silver hair and laugh lines. But underneath, there's steel, there's survival. There's a voice that once trembled and now speaks for those still trapped in their silence. I tell this story not to relive the pain, but to honor the healing. Because every time we speak, we make it easier for someone else to speak. Every time we listen, we become part of someone's escape. And every time we believe a child, we save a life. That's what this is. Not a story of abuse, but a story of breaking free. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this story meant something to you, please like, subscribe, and share it. It gives me strength to keep going, to keep telling these truths. And tell me in the comments, what did this story stir in you? I want to know. I want to listen. Because sometimes just knowing someone's listening is what gives us the courage to speak.